At that time, he wasn't fighting society as such. He was fighting other gangs. And it was like a war.
Behind Charles Bronson's tough guy image, there are surprising truths that his daughter has finally confirmed. Known for playing tough, no-nonsense characters, Bronson was often seen as arrogant and violent. Yet, there has been one persistent rumor about him that has been hidden until now. Before we reveal these truths, let's understand what shaped Charles Bronson. Born on November 3, 1921, in Scoop Town, a coal mining town in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, his real name was Charles Bukinski. He was the 11th of 15 children, and his parents were Lithuanian immigrants. When Charles was 10, his father died from lung disease due to working in the mines. His family struggled with poverty, and Charles experienced it firsthand. At 6, he had to wear a dress to school because his family couldn't afford new clothes. At 16, he started working in the coal mines, earning just $1 per ton of coal. This tough work left him with permanent scars and a fear of tight spaces. In 1943, he was drafted into the Army. People later claimed he was a tail gunner in World War II. But it turns out he trained as a gunner in Arizona and drove a delivery truck during the war. After the war, Bronson tried many jobs, laying bricks, cooking, picking onions, and renting beach chairs in Atlantic City. His big break came when he met some actors who let him paint their stage sets and eventually gave him a chance to act. Bronson, who started out as a painter, discovered something unexpected. He loved acting even more. In 1949, he moved to California and joined acting classes at the Pasadena Playhouse. There, 27-year-old Bronson met and married 18-year-old aspiring actress Harriet Tendler. Soon, he started landing small movie roles, playing all sorts of characters like tough guys and scrappy fighters. Bronson wasn't the typical suave leading man like Cary Grant. He once joked his voice made him sound more like a quarry worker. In his early Hollywood days, he wasn't well known and went by Charles Bukinski. In 1954, he starred in the movie Drum Beat with Alan Ladd and officially changed his name to Charles Bronson. The change was partly due to the fear of communism during that time, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy, so he dropped his Russian-sounding last name. Bronson's career included low-budget films like Machine Gun Kelly in 1958. This movie caught the attention of French actor Alain Delon, who invited Bronson to France, leading to a successful film called Adieu l'ami, which was a big hit in Europe. Before we get to his daughter's revelation, let's talk about one of Bronson's memorable roles that mirrored his real life. In 1963, he played Flight Lieutenant Danny Tunnel King Valinsky in The Great Escape. Danny was an expert at digging escape tunnels from POW camps, despite feeling claustrophobic. Bronson related to this role because of his own claustrophobia from working in mines and serving in the military. Filming those tunnel scenes must have been tough for him. During the filming of The Great Escape, Bronson met actress Jill Ireland, who was married to David McCallum. Bronson jokingly told McCallum he would marry his wife, and it turned out to be true. Bronson's first marriage to Harriet ended in 1965, and he married Ireland in 1968. By then, he was well known. Even if the movie scripts weren't always great, fans loved him, especially in Japan, France, and Italy, where they called him Il Brutto, the ugly one. Ireland appreciated Bronson's mix of tenderness and toughness. Bronson had a reputation for being tough both on and off screen. Some said his face showed a life of rough times and violence. In his youth, he got into fights, threatened people, and even broke a sergeant's arm. He once clashed with a director, leaving him gasping for air. When Britain's notorious prison hardman Michael Gordon Peterson needed a new name in 1987, he chose Charles Bronson, inspired by the actor's tough reputation. Bronson's fierce protection of his family was highlighted when he told Esquire magazine he would take down anyone who harmed them. This stirred up a fuss, even leading Johnny Carson to ask Bronson about it on TV. Bronson didn't mince words and confirmed it plainly, saying, "Because that's what I said." Bronson wasn't friendly with the press, keeping his tough image intact. Bronson found questions from reporters too probing and didn't have much love for film critics either. He felt they didn't even pay to watch the movies they criticized. Famous critic Roger Ebert once interviewed Bronson and noted an intense look in his eyes, hinting at potential violence. Bronson wasn't shy about expressing his dislike for people who annoyed him. He had a run-in with director Nicholas Gessner and openly criticized him, joking about giving him a good shake. His wife, Jill Ireland, knew about his temper and even laughed about it on TV. Director Don Siegel shared a funny story about actress Lee Remick being scared to touch Bronson's face in a scene, fearing he might bite her. During the filming of Hard Times, director Walter Hill remembered Bronson being in impressive shape for his age, though his smoking habit affected his stamina. There was some tension over editing Ireland's scenes, but Hill and Bronson eventually made peace, highlighting Bronson's hot and cold temperament. Sean Penn, who directed Bronson in The Indian Runner, experienced Bronson's strong opinions about his character. Bronson was reluctant to have his character die on screen, fearing it would disappoint his Italian fans. Billy Crystal also had a memorable encounter with Bronson. When Crystal sent him the script for City Slickers, Bronson angrily called to complain that his character died in the movie, referencing his famous Death Wish series where his character never died. Death Wish controversy. Bronson's Death Wish movies stirred controversy. Director Michael Winner thought Bronson was perfect for the role of Paul Kersey, a man seeking revenge after a tragedy befalls his family. Before Bronson accepted the role, it had been turned down by big names like Clint Eastwood and Frank Sinatra. Henry Fonda also declined, calling it repulsive. When Bronson was offered the part, he eagerly accepted, even joking that he'd like to shoot muggers for real. Despite the controversial theme of the movie, Bronson believed it highlighted the dangers of revenge. Death Wish premiered on July 24, 1974, and despite its $3.7 million budget, it grossed $22 million. The movie was based on a 1972 book by Brian Garfield, who was unhappy with Bronson's casting, fearing it made the character's violent turn too predictable. Garfield had originally wanted Sidney Lumet to direct and Jack Lemmon to star. The success of Death Wish led to multiple sequels in 1974, 1982, 1985, 1987, and 1994, though Garfield disapproved, believing they were vanity projects for Bronson. The films continued to spark controversy. In 1984, after Bernard Goetz, the subway vigilante, shot 4 young black men on a New York City train, director Winner made an insensitive joke about the timing of Goetz's actions and the release of a new Death Wish movie. In 2015, Donald Trump referenced Death Wish at a rally, boasting about his handgun permit and saying he'd shoot anyone who attacked him. The crowd chanted Bronson's name, and Trump remarked that Death Wish couldn't be made today because it wasn't politically correct. A life on screen. After the Death Wish series, Bronson continued acting in TV movies like A Family of Cops. Known for playing strong, silent types, Bronson preferred letting his actions speak louder than words. He didn't like watching his own films and kept his personal life private. In 1990, after his wife Jill Ireland passed away from cancer, her memoirs were made into a movie. Jill Clayburgh played Ireland, and Lance Henriksen portrayed Bronson. This movie provided a glimpse into Bronson's life, revealing the man behind the tough exterior. You'd think most people would be touched by a tribute like that, right? Well, not Charles Bronson. He was really upset about it and even talked about suing the filmmakers. Bronson's tough guy image from the movies seemed to spill over into his real life, the truth behind his wild stories. Bronson used to tell wild stories about his past, making it sound like he was just as tough and violent off-screen as on-screen. He talked about fights and how good he was at throwing knives, but it turns out those stories weren't true. He was just trying to make himself sound more interesting. He never ended up behind bars, and people who knew him off-screen said he was nothing like the violent characters he played. He was just adding a bit of spice to his own legend. Misunderstood habits. Some people thought Bronson was arrogant because he didn't shake hands, but the real reason was quite different. Bronson was actually scared of getting sick, so he avoided handshakes to keep away from germs. Some people even think he might have had a bit of OCD, but that's just another guess. Bronson also had a fear of fire. It was a big deal for him and influenced how he lived. For example, when filming Death Wish in 1974, he made sure they stayed in hotels with rooms no higher than the second floor. He wanted to make sure they could get out safely if there was a fire. Despite playing the tough guy, Bronson had his worries, just like anyone else. The sensitive side of Bronson. Bronson was more sensitive than many realized. He loved painting and sculpting in his spare time and preferred talking about his art over his acting in interviews. To keep people from buying his art just because he was famous, he painted under his real name, Bukinski. His paintings sold well on their own merit. Here's a heartwarming story about Bronson and a young Kurt Russell. Russell was just 12 when he acted alongside Bronson in a movie. For Bronson's birthday, Russell surprised him with a remote-controlled airplane. Bronson seemed distant at first, but a few months later, on Russell's birthday, Bronson gave him a top-of-the-line skateboard. When a security guard tried to stop Russell from using it on the studio lot, Bronson stood up for him, declaring they would both skateboard around the lot. Tragic loss and resilience. Bronson endured many hardships, including the tragic loss of his second wife, Jill Ireland. 8 years after losing her, he found love again with Kim Michelle Weeks, a younger actress who stayed with him until the end. Bronson faced health troubles like needing a new hip and eventually retired from acting due to his health. He passed away in 2003 at 81 years old due to breathing problems and lung cancer. Legacy and wealth. Bronson had multiple children: Zuleika Bronson, Tony Bronson, Suzanne Bronson, and Katrina Holden Bronson. Katrina later confirmed that she was adopted, not a biological daughter, but she became a successful film director. Bronson was smart with his contracts, amassing a fortune worth around $75 million in today's money. He had various properties from mansions to farms. Among all his wealth, the most precious thing he left behind was a painting called Scoop Town, owned by his first wife Harriet, as a memory of his past. Reflecting on his life. Charles Bronson's story shows that no matter how tough someone may seem, there is always room for love and humanity. So, what legacy do you hope to leave behind, and what treasures will define your journey? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more updates. Until next time, stay tuned.